Watch right now on the Front News Project. Fierce battles in Pokrovsk, local assaults, Putin's army, exclusive footage. A shock for Russia. The Sapsan ballistic missile is already scorching the ground beneath the invaders' feet. And also, Putin is starting a war with NATO. The alliance will immediately strike Kaliningrad. Fiery, intense, and blazing. Watch frontline footage right now. Greetings, this is Vladimir Timoshenko with you, and we're starting right away with the most important news. Since mid-November, the Ukrainian army has managed to regain control over part of Pokrovsk and is now holding the northern part of the city. This was stated by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. At the same time, the Russians in Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad have increased their grouping to 156,000 personnel. TSN special correspondent Yulia Kirienko has returned from the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Her exclusive report. Let's watch.
On the rear road in the Pokrovsk direction, a military truck is burning out. Although the highway is surrounded by a drone net, it did not protect it from the Russian Lancet. To disrupt the logistics for our troops in the rear and cut off our infantry at the front. This is the Russian tactic. These guys are trying to save it now. Pokrovsk. At least what remains of it is under our Ukrainian control. There are enough positions, assault actions are ongoing, but the situation is quite difficult. This is the 82nd Airborne Brigade. It was redeployed here from the Dobropilia direction. Now the soldiers are trying to push the Russians out of the industrial zone. Here it is on the screens. And in it, they spot 2 occupiers who are advancing to storm.
The enemy outnumbers us, and it's very hard. Even when you kill them, they just keep coming, and coming. The ratio is 1 to 5 or 6.
To straighten the defensive line, the soldiers withdrew from the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, from the villages of Suky Yar and Lysivka, which they had held for over a year. Now they are focusing on the northern parts of the city. The enemy, in turn, is trying to gain a foothold in the high-rise buildings.
In the city, you have to destroy certain buildings, destroy shelters, destroy some basements that are really fortified. Moreover, our units were still there before this, so it's quite difficult to fight in Pokrovsk.
This is what the road leading into the city from the south looks like. It's a complete graveyard of both our equipment and the enemy's. These shots vividly show just how intense it is here.
Within a month, we destroyed up to a battalion of Russians through small arms combat UAVs and artillery. At least one battalion, a fully manned battalion, we put them out of action. That's 100%. They send one group in and we take them out, but then they send another group down the same road, the same path, and it goes on like this endlessly.
There are quite a lot of enemy forces in Pokrovsk, according to the defense forces. In the background of our conversation, a shout comes over the radio. The Russians have pinpointed our position and are attacking it with FPV drones. There are wounded who are calling.
If you find yourself in a situation where you require assistance or guidance, please do not hesitate to reach out for help and support.
The battalion commander grabs the radio and personally gets on the line to calm the soldiers down.
All right, calm down, sit down. Take aim and shoot them down. Whoever is lying on their stomach, do the same thing. Lie down, sit up, and start shooting them down. Help is on the way, but you need to wait a little.
While the evacuation team heads out to retrieve the wounded, a large drone takes to the sky. And with a single drop, it incinerates the enemy Russian position in the hangar. The enemy has dozens of such positions throughout the city. To destroy each one, technical resources are needed. And people say the defense forces. And the task of our troops, at least for now, is to make it impossible for the Russians to move around Pokrovsk. Impossible. But there is still a lot of work to be done for that.
We have already managed to impose our will on the enemy in Pokrovsk. They understand that it will be very difficult for them to fight here. And in the past 2 weeks, Ukraine has struck several of the most important strategic military targets on the territory of Russia, as well as in temporarily occupied Crimea. How did it happen? Exclusive details and exclusive footage will be shared and shown by TSN Nedelya correspondent Oleksandr Zahorodny.
There they are, tracers. Now there will be an impact. It's coming. That's it, impact.
In the past 2 weeks, Ukraine's defense forces have carried out the largest and likely the most successful strike on strategic enterprises of the aggressor country.
See, it's chemicals. It's burning.
Nevinomysky Azot is one of the largest chemical plants in the world. To understand its scale, let's watch a segment from Russian television.
The territory of Nevinomysky Azot is enormous, like a separate city. Visiting it is very interesting, but not everyone gets such an opportunity. The heroes of our story were lucky. They were able to see the city-forming enterprise from the inside.
Good drones got that chance. They made it and hit the target.
Look, they blew it up. There goes the smoke.
The military say this is a very high-value target. Besides fertilizers, this plant produces acetic acid and ammonium nitrate. Thousands of tons of explosive components. The plant will not be operating for some time. Just recently, good drones were also welcomed at the Ryazan and Sizran.
Large industrial oil refineries and processing plants.
The port in Temryuk is also getting hit, and Kadyrov's pride is taking a bit of a blow too. The Akhmat Regiment base and Grozny city. This week, the most powerful power plant in Kostroma is also being struck. Its capacity is equivalent to 4 nuclear power units.
The Kostroma power plant is the pride of Russian energy, the largest thermal power station in Europe. Just imagine the scale. Today, the Kostroma GRES generates 3% of all electricity produced in the country.
This week, drones from the special unit of the Main Intelligence Directorate, Phantom, managed to reach Crimea with their UAVs. They destroyed several combat aircraft, including MiG-29s, as well as heavy drones and radar antennas. But all these successes pale in comparison to the strike on the port of Novorossiysk. The drones managed to destroy an offshore mooring facility, equipment that enables oil to be loaded onto large tankers. The Russians plan to repair this facility in a year and a half. And through the port of Novorossiysk, they export just over 2% of the world's oil. During this period, gasoline prices could spike across the globe, but not right now. This has already been confirmed by an expert. Serhiy Kuyun, global oil prices remain stable and low.
In fact, believe me, everyone in the world is just waiting for Russia to cut its production because there is a huge surplus of oil. Accordingly, American companies, Saudi companies, they will simply make up for it, as will the OPEC countries. They will quickly replace this Russian export and no one will even notice. That's why I think there are far more people in the world who want this export to stop.
They have oil. Where are they going to put it? What are they going to do with it?
They don't, there's nowhere to put it.
But in Novorossiysk, which the enemy has fortified from the sea and from the air, only a handful of drones make it through. And that's why another way was found to block Russian oil exports. Tankers. Here's how the attack by unmanned boats on the ships is described. A Russian captain on a radio intercept. Remarkably, Russia's Shadow Fleet tankers are being hit all over the world. For example, like this one near the port of Dakar. This is West Africa. There were 4 explosions on the hull of the Marsin oil tanker. On the outside of the hull, water got into the engine room. The crew was unharmed. The vessel is partially submerged. It is unknown who carried out the sabotage. Military expert Ivan Stupak has already counted 10 ships in the world's oceans that were transporting Russian oil. And now they are either burning or sinking.
There's no need to strike Novorossiysk, you can hit a weak spot instead. And we saw a very wild reaction from Putin to the possibility of pirate attacks. That is, if this all happens, we'll cut it off, we'll start bombing. Oh, that means we're on the right track, even though we've only just begun and haven't really done anything yet.
There are almost 1,500 tankers in Russia's Shadow Fleet, but there are only a few dozen owners. And some of these businessmen have already stated that they will not work with Russia. It's dangerous and very expensive. And it's not just about the repairs themselves. The standard insurance for even the smallest tanker is hundreds of thousands of dollars. But war risk insurance multiplies that by 10. And then there's the crew who refuse to sail on a ship with a target painted on its side. An idle tanker is also a loss. That's millions of dollars not earned.
When the market gets a signal like sabotage tankers, well, it just means, well, simply stop. Accordingly, this is a very powerful move. And honestly, this is exactly what sanctions should look like.
Unlike gas storage facilities, there are no natural underground reservoirs for oil. By the way, for the Russians, the tanker fleet also served as storage. Russians are running out of places to put their oil. Some of it, of course, they ship to ports in the Baltics, some to the Far East, but that won't solve the problem. There are only 2 options, either shut down the wells or sell the oil. Sell it so cheaply that it covers all the risks for the owners of the Shadow Fleet. Previously, there was another option. The Russians could escort tanker convoys with warships from the Black Sea Fleet. But now they're either at the bottom of the sea, like the flagship cruiser Moskva, or they don't leave the port of Novorossiysk at all. Strange as it may sound, Ukraine has now become one of the real global regulators of the oil market.
But who could have thought?
Like this, gradually, Ukraine is joining the list of countries that influence the global oil market. Through the port of Novorossiysk, we are already controlling the transportation of more than 2% of the world's oil. That's not so little after all.
And now it's time to analyze the current situation on the Konstantinovka front line, Putin's army, and here they're true to form. There were 23 combat clashes today in the Konstantinovka direction. The enemy tried to storm the positions of Ukrainian units near Oleksandr Shultino, Preshaivka, Rusinyar, Yablonivka, and towards Konstantinivka, Ilinivka, and Sofiivka. Poland is partially closing the skies over Ukraine. Earlier, the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces spoke about negotiations regarding the possible transfer of MiG-29 fighter jets to Kiev. We're talking about a large batch capable of significantly improving the situation at the front. Our air fleet is also being replenished with French Gripens as well as Mirages, about strengthening Ukraine's Air Force and new prospects, which are opening up for our country with their help, as we'll explain in this report.
Ukraine has strengthened its position in the skies. Volodymyr Zelensky announced the reinforcement of the Ukrainian Armed Forces air fleet.
Every visit, every negotiation always brings practical results for our defense, for our resilience. Today, our combat aviation has been strengthened. Thank you. The details are not public yet, but we are constantly gaining strength in the skies.
It is not known exactly which systems or aircraft are being discussed, but at the same time, the Polish General Staff reported on negotiations with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 fighter jets to Kyiv. As part of the deal, Ukrainians will receive MiGs, while the Poles will get technology for joint production of drones and missiles.
We are pleased to inform you that negotiations are underway with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 aircraft. The transfer of the aircraft is due to them reaching the end of their service life and the lack of prospects for their further modernization within the Polish Armed Forces. We also inform you that a final decision has not yet been made. The transfer of the aircraft will be part of the alliance's policy to support Ukraine and ensure the security of NATO's eastern flank. The tasks currently performed by the retiring MiG-29s will be taken over by F-16 and F-A-50 aircraft.
In addition to working with Soviet models, Ukraine is actively introducing Western fighter jets into its fleet. In November, Kyiv signed an agreement with Paris and Stockholm to produce Swedish Gripens and French Rafales for the Ukrainian armed forces.
The production rate for Rafales is 3 aircraft per month. This is much higher than the production of Gripens, which is 12 aircraft per year. And France plans to increase production to 5 aircraft per month.
In the case of the French Rafales, Ukraine potentially receives not just a fighter jet, but also a DCS-linked node for the diverse fleet of Western aircraft supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Networked interaction, meaning it actually allows for the integration of the entire assortment of aircraft that has been transferred to the Ukrainian side. These include the F-16S and Mirages, and accordingly the Rafales themselves and the possible transfer of Gripens. All of this makes it possible to use the Rafale for specifically as a key node in the combat network. In other words, at the moment of interaction with aircraft and air defense systems, it effectively creates a unified air defense complex.
Western fighter jets such as the Rafale, F-16 Gripen and Mirage have an advantage over their Russian counterparts. In terms of internal components, from electronic warfare systems and detection radars to modern air-to-air missiles,
this fighter jet has received an upgraded radar which is capable of operating under electronic warfare countermeasures. Plus, the forward sector optoelectronic system allows this fighter to better detect targets at long distances and under more challenging conditions.
But under current combat conditions, fighter jets, whether Soviet MiGs, American F-16s or French Rafales, are primarily used as air defense assets to repel massive enemy missile and drone attacks.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now let's move to the Alexandrovsk direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. In the Alexandrovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled 20 attacks by the invaders in the areas of populated settlements. Voronoe, Stepovo, and towards Ivanovka, Novosilovka, Sosnovka, Zelenigai, Verbovoe, Vishnevoe, Egorovka, Krasnogorskoye, Rybnoe, and Uspenovka. A harsh retaliation against the enemy for strikes on Ukrainian soil. Zelensky has confirmed the combat use of Ukrainian Sapsan ballistic missiles. Let's not forget about Flamingo either. More details on what and how the Ukrainian armed forces will use to strike deep into the Russian rear coming up in our report.
Sapsan in action. The Ukrainian armed forces have begun using domestically produced ballistic missiles to strike the enemy. The exact specifications of the Sapsan missile are not disclosed, but its deployment by the Ukrainian military will allow them to strike enemy targets, possibly even more effectively than with ATACMS. Ukrainian missiles have twice the explosive power, fly faster, and have a greater range.
What is the unique advantage of using the Sapsan operational tactical missile system? Its use against targets both on the territory of the Russian Federation, indeed primarily on the territory of the Russian Federation, as well as against legitimate military targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is an exclusively sovereign right of the Ukrainian side itself.
In addition to Sapsan, the Ukrainian army is also using several other domestically produced missiles against the aggressor country. This was stated by the President of Ukraine.
He says that the Ukrainian side, despite the intensity of strikes on defense industry enterprises, has managed not only to preserve the infrastructure of its defense industry, but also to increase and scale up the production of its own strike weapons. This testifies to the presence of qualified engineering personnel, and there is sufficient funding for Ukrainian defense industry enterprises that are capable of scaling up the production of Ukrainian-made strike weapons. Virtually all Ukrainian strike weapons are made exclusively from Ukrainian components.
Let us recall that in September of this year, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is actively developing long-range weaponry. He said that the tests were successful and the next stage is the launch of serial production. Earlier, Ukraine began production of Flamingo cruise missiles with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. On Friday, December 5th, the company Firepoint delivered another batch of cruise missiles to the Ukrainian military. Also in November, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked important targets on Russian territory. Long Neptune missiles were used for the strikes. Another of the most important developments has been drone missiles such as Polyanitsia, Peklo, Ruta, and Bars.
The Ukrainian side is ready to scale up and deploy its own strike assets across the territory of the Russian Federation. This referred to the Sapsan and, accordingly, the Flamingo. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have scaled up the production of strike drones with a target range of over 1.5 kilometers.
Ukrainian armed forces are successfully striking military targets in the Russian Federation, and oil refineries are also in the crosshairs of drone systems.
It was precisely the use of Ukrainian strike assets that made it possible to effectively block the operation of about 40% of Russian oil refineries. According to the Russian side itself, losses to the Russian budget are estimated at around $100 billion. But it should also be noted that the Ukrainian side does not intend to stop at these results.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used on the front lines. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased by dozens of times. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create innovations in the defense industry and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
Starting from the new year, the Ukrainian defense industry and the defense forces of Ukraine will receive Ukrainian ballistic missiles with a target range of about 800 kilometers. It should be noted that the manufacturing company claims to have developed 2 ballistic missiles with a strike range of up to 200 and, respectively, up to 800 kilometers.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weapons that destroy important enemy military targets at great depth.
And now it's time to analyze the situation on the long-suffering Kupyansk and also the Lyman directions of the front. Fierce battles continue. In the Kupyansk direction, the enemy made 9 attempts to advance towards Petropavlivka and Kurilivka. In the Lyman direction, the defense forces repelled 23 assault actions in the areas of the settlements of Novoyehorivka, Rekivka, Novoselivka, Zareknaya, Torske, and towards other settlements. Cherneshchina, Oleksandrivka, Drobyshev, Stavki, and Lyman. At present, 4 more combat clashes are ongoing. Yes, the defense forces continue to control most of Kupyansk. Ukrainian units are present in particular in the western, eastern, and partially southern districts of the city. Therefore, all these stories about the occupation of the city are fabrications of Russian propaganda. Here are the details.
Another one of Putin's so-called victories, of course, only in words.
Dear comrades, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are confidently maintaining the initiative and continue to carry out the tasks of the special military operation.
They claim the complete capture of Kupyansk in the Kharkiv region and the alleged encirclement of 15 battalions in the city. The enemy has been making these statements about the Ukrainian defense forces since the beginning of December. This is noted by the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation.
In fact, in order to fuel this information psychological special operation, we are giving them Kupyansk. It is obvious that the Russians have already involved the so-called top officials of their state. This includes citizen Gerasimov, who calls himself the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Accordingly, this is at least one of the Putins who is also taking part in such an information psychological operation. And accordingly, we see that even some Western media are getting involved. They are reporting on the complete encirclement of Kupyansk, on its total capture. Moreover, this publication is quite reputable.
The claim by the Russians is also denied by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, who added that Ukrainian troops have managed to significantly improve their tactical position directly in Kupyansk. At the moment, a successful counter-sabotage operation is ongoing in the city aimed at eliminating the enemy, of whom only a few dozen remain there.
It is obvious that the Russians have not managed to achieve such significant successes on the battlefield. Despite the fierce fighting and despite the fact that the grouping of Russian troops operating from the northern Slobozansky direction all the way to the Crimean front, today the intensity of combat operations is extremely high. However, even after concentrating massive forces in the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad directions in our hottest frontline directions, including the Kupyansk direction, are not bringing them success. Obviously, they need to show that all these efforts by Russian troops are, first of all, achieving results, positive results, rapid advances. And this information needs to be conveyed to our European partners as much as possible to show them Ukraine's weakness and accordingly the strength of the Russian army.
According to the operational situation as of the morning of December 10th in the Kupyansk direction, our defenders repelled the occupiers' assault actions towards Petropavlivka and Bohuslavka.
Today we can say that the enemy has been pushed back to the northern outskirts of the city of Kupyansk from where they entered. And those positions, which sometimes change hands 5 or 6 times or even more, are now under the control of the defense forces. Today a counter-sabotage operation is underway. In other words, we are essentially talking about clearing certain sectors of the city of Kupyansk of Russian troops in order to try to completely push the Russians out of the city.
Nevertheless, the Russians continue to shell the Kupyansk area with guided bombs, while Ukrainian rescuers evacuate the local population under fire.
The evacuation continues and is being carried out by the relevant army units and police structures, and it will continue. People need to be evacuated from Kupyansk because this forced evacuation really does need to be an evacuation. Civilians in this situation cannot interfere with the defense forces. We have seen how this ends, particularly in Kupyansk itself. You remember the situation when the Russians actively used civilian clothing in order to disguise themselves and infiltrate the city center to carry out their so-called flash mobs there, these so-called flag planting actions, and most importantly, to try to penetrate further into our positions.
Those who still decide to stay in the city are openly not welcoming the occupiers and give a direct response. Tell the commanders to leave. Understood? And don't come back. A man without any fear looks the occupiers who slipped into his building entrance in the eye and tells them to mind their own country. And he recalls how Ukrainian soldiers used to share their food with him. and
Now let's analyze the situation on the Orikhiv front line. The so-called Russian world continues here as well to destroy, kill, and maim. On the Orikhiv front, the enemy tried 9 times. They tried in vain to break through our defenses. In the areas of the settlements of Shcherbaki, Stepov, and in the direction of Malatokmachka, Novoandrivka, Stepnohirsk, and Primorske. And now, attention. NATO fully controls the Baltic Sea and is ready for an attack from Kaliningrad. This was stated by the head of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Giuseppe Cavodragone. Russian propaganda is already hysterical about this. Will a war between Russia and NATO really start with Kaliningrad? We cover this in our next segment.
the starting point, a war between Russia and NATO begins with the Kaliningrad region.
Kaliningrad is undoubtedly one of the most important regions of Russia. Our outpost in the west.
The Kremlin is preparing new provocations.
The Russian Federation is artificially escalating conflicts.
The alliance has declared its readiness to strike Kaliningrad. The Kaliningrad region is the westernmost region of the Russian Federation and is an exclave completely separated from the main territory of Russia by other countries.
The Russians have effectively turned the Kaliningrad region into a military base. The main formations include ground forces, aviation, and the largest naval base of the Baltic Fleet.
The topic of the Kaliningrad region came up precisely at the moment. The United States is making maximum efforts precisely on the issue of ending the war in Ukraine. And in my opinion, it is specifically through the Kaliningrad region and the possibility of direct confrontation with the NATO bloc. The Russian Federation is trying to divert the attention of the United States from the Ukrainian issue. Or it is creating a precedent for a so-called exchange.
Kaliningrad very often becomes the center of Russian saber rattling. In this way, Putin is testing the ground for NATO's capabilities. For example, during the joint Zapad 2025 exercises with Belarus, the military practiced combat operations on the territory of the Kaliningrad region, after which the Kremlin deployed Iskander missiles there, posing a threat to 6 alliance countries.
Provocations specifically from the territory of the Kaliningrad region. This includes jamming GPS signals, both maritime and aviation components. This accordingly is the redeployment within the Kaliningrad region. Of the same Iskander systems, S-400 anti-aircraft missile complexes, and other active defense strike assets of the occupying country's army. In other words, the Kaliningrad region is currently being militarized.
At the same time, Russian propaganda continues its campaign to spread disinformation about NATO countries allegedly preparing to attack Russia.
This concerns possible sanctions from EU countries at the moment, including a blockade of the Russian exclave, the Kaliningrad region. And the Russian Federation claims that such a decision by EU countries would set a precedent for the possible use of military force at that moment to lift this blockade. The Russian Federation makes it clear that accordingly the possibility of the EU imposing economic sanctions at the moment of a blockade of the Russian exclave will be perceived by the Russian Federation as the creation of a casus belli, that is, as grounds for the use of military force by the Russian Federation.
Back in July, NATO allies announced that they had developed a plan to neutralize the Kaliningrad region. This plan is intended to counter threats from Russia and ensure global deterrence.
NATO countries are carrying out preventive measures to strengthen the defense capabilities of these countries and accordingly to reduce the possibility of a direct invasion of the territory of Poland and Lithuania. This includes the redeployment of additional military contingents, conducting joint exercises, both land, naval, and air components, and accordingly the development of plans. The possibility of blockading the Kaliningrad region.
Russia is interested in there being disagreements within the alliance. It needs division and the undermining of unity in order to create a serious crisis within NATO. But it's unlikely that will work.
That's all for today. But very soon there will be something new on the Front News program. Unique materials from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.